back in November 2009, NATO forces and NATO coalition forces, through the Allied Command operations, realized that NATO really was able to take advantage of biometric information, the data sharing that's available, and the overall missions which biometrics can fit in. A lot of this was done through the U.S. and DoD uses within theater in Iraq and other places to promote identity and the ability to identify anonymous persons throughout the world. It started as a document, and it was meant to be a technical standard and the means to be able to share biometric information. The interoperability gap itself is meant to tackle how devices and also repositories that want to process biometric information between NATO nations and NATO partners, what they can do to utilize the data that's available. So interoperability and the gap that exists now is a big gap from the standpoint of inability to share information. So when one country or one nation has a biometric collection, the means of being able to transport that in a standard way to another nation and have that usable information is the gap that we're trying to solve. So the biggest thing is that when we realize that we're in a global environment, some of the enemies that we have are around the world. They have missions that take them from different country, different areas of operation, and the knowledge that their actions and how they want to try to either attack or do harmful things to us and our partners happen all around the world. So we've seen cases where we've encountered folks overseas, and they've tried to enter our borders, whether it be through an airport or other places as well. And through the use of biometrics, we've been able to deny them entry, or possibly in other cases applications for visas, other things along those lines that they would try to enter our borders. So creating those international relationships and being able to utilize the effect of biometric identification is something that's very important for DoD and for the U.S. as a whole. Policy actually has a very big role. It's when you break up the concept of sharing, you really have policy on one side and then technical interoperability on the other side, and they really do need to work hand in hand. And so we've been working with here at BIMA and DoD within the states. We've been working closely with our other partners at NATO headquarters and the U.S. UCOM and NATO SHAPE as well, to make sure that the technical pieces we've been doing at BIMA match what the policy says at NATO headquarters. And the reason why policy is such a big effort for us as well is that in many cases when we want to do sharing, we have to look at the personal identifying information, the other privacy considerations we have with some of the other nations, especially within the EU. It's a big concern with them. So we need to make sure we have that policy in place that allows us to go ahead and collect, share, store, and match that biometric information. But even beyond that, once we do conduct those operations, it becomes a situation of what agreements do we have and what policy do we have in place with different nations. So, for instance, if we have a submission from nation A that matches to nation B, how much information do they get back? Do they get the full match? Do they only get a little bit? So that's why policy is so important, because it's only one part to have the technical ability to share. You need to have the authority to do so as well. STANAG 4715 is meant to do a couple different things, but the first part is the data interchange format. It also has the watch listing piece and some other reporting mechanisms involved as well. Within that, and especially within the interchange format, we have focused on 5 modalities. Some are current, some are future, but we're starting with those now. the three big ones that we use within DoD are finger, face, and iris. Those are pretty well established within the industry and been around for quite a while, especially fingerprints dating back multiple decades for the initial use within law enforcement. So we started with those, and then in our discussions and working group meetings, we went through and we also added DNA and voice as additional modalities as well. So those are the 5 that we have. DNA and voice bring some other complications into the mix from the standpoint of DNA doesn't really have a quick response at this point. In some cases it takes up to 45 minutes, even an hour to get a response back, but we are still planning for that as more of a forensic capability and bringing that in for future capabilities. Same thing with voice. Voice data can be rather complicated because you now have a time component involved and a need to capture that sample over a various period of time. So it's not as quick and easy as some of the image-based biometrics can be, such as finger, face, and iris, where you do an image match or an image search. There's more variables involved from that. So that's what we've set out to do thus far, and some are, again, current, some are more looking ahead to forward thinking. We talked a little bit on the challenges from the policy piece, so that'll be long-term wise, the ability for what data can be shared. So if we have data about a person and another country matches to our data, what obligation do we have to respond back? Is it simply that we do have previous known knowledge of that person? Do we provide a copy of it? Those questions are kind of a wide-ranging level of which you can share information back. And then you get some, even within NATO, it's still 28 nations, so you need to have an understanding as to which nations may be sharing more information with others. So if Nation A and Nation B have a higher agreement to share and they're more quick, then they may not have the same information that another nation has. So the long-term impact of how that will apply is certainly going to be a long-term challenge. Additionally, and sort of as it moves towards the technical architecture, the question becomes, how much can we actually centralize it? Ideally, from a information and a synchronization standpoint, it would be good to have one single database for everyone to use and to reference. And in a practical sense, that's probably not very feasible because you again have the need to segment out that data from different nations based on the restrictions, where it can be used, who can see it, who can actually interact with it. So and again, where does that reside? Is it going to be split across different nations? So those two pieces, the policy of how much data can be shared as well as what the architecture looks like, are going to be two of the major challenges. And especially on the architecture front, right now we have countries building their own databases. So the gap there becomes, if I've encountered a person 2 weeks later, are those databases in sync? So that's why a centralized makes sense, but it doesn't necessarily follow through with a completely practical way to go. I think what's going to be required from overall, and especially as you think of it from military and an overall perspective, from what the user is and who the boots on the ground are, the biggest thing that they want is quick responses and the ability to take action quickly. So knowing that's their biggest concern is going to be what BIMA and DoD's biggest concern is going to be. In order to get there, the faster response times, the ability, and it leads right into standards and interoperability and the means to share, because the quicker we can get the data from the repository to the boots on the ground, the soldier or whoever needs that information, the better we can do that. So the faster response time is already being worked on, but that would probably be the biggest request, and that involves having clean data coming in, being able to process the data quickly and get the result back out. So I think that's where we still have some room for improvement, and we're working to do that.